Yeah, I want to talk about the irreversibility of climate change with some degree of global warming, because we all know that there's climate change, the climate changes. Well, climate is like a transition of weather. So given the weather is a certain way, but then let's say there's some influx of humidity, and how that influx would change the weather. That transition is the difference in transition from weather to weather given some atmospheric input or changes to a certain atmosphere within some geography, let's say. That's a climate change. And now it's changing for a global warming. The climate change is now that the globe is warmer, because you know that climate change, it doesn't have to be a warming, but as a matter of fact, the climate change is towards a global warming. And the global warming, there's a certain degree of how much the whole Earth, globally, everywhere, is warmed. And there's a degree of global warming. And I want to make an argument that there will be a point in time after which that it will be irreversible. The climate change, we can't go back if we are beyond that point of no return. So here it is. This is the outline. I will talk about the equilibrium of a system and how a system has a goal state, and a certain point may be that the system would be knocked out of the course such that the equilibrium will no longer be the goal state. And so that's one way to look at a system approach towards atmosphere. And then I'll talk about what it is to be reversible, what reversibility is, and lay that out in relation to an equilibrium conception of a system. And then I'll talk about what failure is, and especially with what it is for a system to malfunction, and the difference between a system abnormality and an abnormal system. So whether the system has some abnormality or whether the system itself is abnormal. And then lastly, I'll talk about change, because we're talking about climate change, and how that there will be a point in time after which the change is permanent or irreversible. And that's something we should be worried, because at the back of my mind, I want to see whether the net zero target, well, maybe some talking about 20-ish years from now, even a few years from now, net zero, is that sufficient? And I want to argue that we need real zero as early as possible, and I'll give my reason. So first, equilibrium. For a system, we talk about order, entropy. And to talk about order, we can think about a system with a certain, the state of a system with some initial parameters within the normal range. Yeah, what it is to be normal, it's in terms of a system that's been designed, a normal range is the range within which the parameters would have an equilibrium that will be the goal state. A system is designed to do a certain thing. It's designed to reach a certain state, a goal state. It's supposed to reach a certain state at which it is what is designed to reach. So within the range, then the goal state is still achievable, and as a system, it evolves over time and interact with the environment or interact with other systems, so that input into the system. So given the initial parameters, in the initial state, initial condition is within the normal range, and given normal input, the system will in the end eventually reach the goal state. So there's some order within the various things being the way they are, the parameters, and that order is something that's important. Sometimes people talk about emergent properties. It's like a certain arrangement of things, and then there'll be some order from within the system, given that those things being those ways constitute a system. And then given that it's a system, then we can talk about this order, having talked about order. So that's when the initial parameters are abnormal, or even if it were, even if it started with an initial parameters that are normal, but then you have abnormal input, so it knock it out of track. And then once either it started with an abnormal initial parameters, or even with normal initial parameters, given some abnormal input, then the system will not be able to reach the goal state except with restorative input. So of course, a very easy illustration is with children. So suppose, well, gametes, sperms and eggs, fertilization, zygote, and then it develops into a fetus, and then a child is born. So the child with the initial parameters of having certain brain that's developed up to a certain point, then given the initial parameters are within normal range. So let's say it doesn't, there are various congenial brain deficiency, but let's say it's within normal range. And then given normal input, it's brought up and fed with normal milk, normal food. So it will develop into a certain goal state, let's say into an infant that's born will develop into a child that's able to speak. So that's at least that interim goal state that it will reach. But if the initial parameters is abnormal in a way that maybe its brain, because of some genetic problem, the initial parameters is such that it doesn't develop with the brain that will have developed into a child that have a verbal, have the natural language abilities, or maybe during its upbringing, it could be that it's fed with unhealthy food or even harmful food, chemicals. So those are abnormal input. And then, except with restorative input, let's say the things it ate, it didn't cause permanent damage. We can still restore whatever that's been knocked out of its original tract. But if we didn't restore the infant's state of health, then it will not reach the goal state. So another more concrete example from sports, curling. So it's on a ice ground, and then someone, I think, throw the bowl, and then there will be a few people that, I think that's the curling, right? To make sure that it reached a certain spot. So if the initial parameters are good, then it will reach a certain position. But even when the initial parameters are good, you still need to input to do around the ball. So it will, once it lost all momentum, it will be where we want it to be at the goal state. So curling is a little bit like that. You have to interact with the environment, given normal input, and given that it's within the normal range, it will reach the goal state. But if it's beyond the normal range, then whatever you do, maybe except with some restorative input, it won't reach what we want it to go. It won't reach what it's designed to do. So with that at the background, because I've talked about what restoration is, I can talk about reversibility. So suppose that a system is off track, given that there's some input that will put it back on track. So maybe a system is at a certain state with some strange parameters, like a child has been eating too much, I don't know, sugary drinks when he was still an infant, and the mother or father fed him too much Coke, let's say, and it enjoys it very much, and it develops an addictive an addiction towards the sugary drink. So if we have some kind of input, maybe we cessation of the stimulus, we don't let it have too much sugary drink. If we can get rid of the addiction, then it will go back to a normal the parameters. The neural connectivity will go back to a normal range. So instead of staying a malfunctioning system that keeps on craving for sugary drinks, the malfunctioning system will have been repaired, and then it will go back on track. But then there are inputs that are irrevocable, because well, irrevocable, that's when it reached a certain point, or maybe the input would have put it off course, so much off course that there are no possible restorative input. Let's say the child was not fed with, well, even with addiction, sugary addiction, let's say it's curable, we can quit, the child can quit, even not through our dietary habits, training. But let's say the child was not fed with addictive substance like sugary drinks, but it was exposed to radioactivity. So the mutation that, as we all know, up to this point, given our medical research, there are some mutation that's irreversible, and whatever you try to restore, to put the child on track, the infant on track, there's no possible restorative input. There's nothing we can do to bring someone with the kind of mutation that's been exposed to strong radioactivity back to normal. So there will be parameters that's, as time goes on, evolved towards an equilibrium. That's not what it is designed to do, or what even it itself wants to have become. Maybe it would have tumor or die young. So that's when a malfunctioning system malfunctions ever after. There's no way we can put it back on track and function again. And the sports analogy would be, because when you bowl in a bowling lane, there's the initial parameter is how much spin you gave, or the position of your how you roll the bowling ball, and within that range, you might hit the target, maybe not completely, but once it's in the gutter, then there's nothing you can do. You know that it will not reach the goal state, even partially. It would not have achieved its goal, even partially. It's in the gutter, and no possible restorative input. So that's reversibility, to think in terms of system. So what is failure? So a state failure would be, so a system is constituted by different state. A system is at a certain state, in a certain state at a certain time. But then there are some states that are abnormal. It's just that those states instantiate parameters that are out of range. Of course, parameters, and whether a certain set of parameters are within the normal range or not, maybe they interact with each other. So let's say someone that's very short, but his well, no, I'm sorry, very heavy, So weigh very much, maybe even 150 kilograms. But then it's because of his body mass, right? Supposedly someone with 300 pounds, more than that, that's probably very much obese. That's a parameter that seems to be out of range, but it interacts with your muscle mass, your the fat ratio, fat to muscle ratio. So the parameters within range, out of range, it interact with many other parameters. So there are some parameters, the combination of which is abnormal, out of the normal range. So that's a failed state. So that's when a system is in a state, that's a failure. So that's a system abnormality. But it contrasts to an abnormal system, because a system abnormality could have been restored, let's say with a restorative input, and we want that failing parameter to be adjusted to go back to the normal range. So the state that's instantiating some failing parameters, we do something so it go back to normal. So the system would no longer be at abnormality. So it will be to go back from abnormal and also malfunctioning to normal and functioning and towards with an equilibrium that's towards the goal state. And that differs from a system failure, which is an abnormal system because of the failed system. It's not because only of the failed state. It's the function, the transition function. Now, it doesn't go from, given whatever parameters now, of course, it interacts with the parameters, the transition function, how the system go forward given some input. There will be a point that a system just it's not only a normal system at abnormality, but the system itself has become abnormal. And because the transition function failed, it doesn't work the way it is designed to be. And there will be a point at which that there's no going back. We can't reverse that change in the function. And this will be clearer when I illustrate it with an actual example that I want to talk about. But to do that informally, to do that with an actual case would be something like, so when I have a computer, the hardware, a Macintosh or an IBM, or even with an iPhone or an Android. So the hardware is fine, but then maybe some apps have bugs, or maybe the iOS, the operating system, has bugs. Then I update it. So the hardware with a certain software is that hardware is in a state that's a failed state, and it has some parameters that's not within the normal range. But then if we update the software, the hardware would have been restored to a good, a functioning, a normal state. But there are a point in time after which even the hardware doesn't work anymore. Maybe whatever you input, it doesn't update to what it's supposed to be, and there's no way you can do to restore the system into its original normal system. And that's when you have to replace the hardware, of course. Then there's the problem of whether you replace only a parts, because like an iPhone, maybe it's modular, you can change a bit of it, or maybe there will be some kind of system failure that's whatever you do, it's no more. You need a new one. So that's the difference in the failure. And I want to do use that to illustrate informally the importance of noticing that there might be, and I want to push forward that there is a point of no return. So carbon dioxide, well, of course, we usually talk about greenhouse gas, but I want to focus on carbon dioxide. So at the atmospheric state, the atmosphere and the state of the atmosphere. So usually, let's go back to before industrialization, that there, of course, the agriculture, the animal rearing, domestication of animal, and vegetation, plantation, everything, farming. So of course, animal, including human beings, we have our metabolism. We breathe in oxygen and consume food and oxygen. And in the mitochondria, there will be the metabolism that consumes oxygen and to break down food content with ATP and use for energy and outputs carbon dioxide. So animal will produce output carbon dioxide, but plants, especially forests in various parts of the world, will, through photosynthesis, given the sunlight that's been inputted to the leaves with chlorophyll, will turn carbon dioxide into the food in whatever form in the plant and output oxygen. So carbon dioxide are decomposed and oxygen are produced. So this supposedly to be a kind of a cycle that's sustainable before the industrialization. But then, of course, we all know after industrialization, there are higher carbon dioxide emission to the point that there are two things that happen. Of course, the law of nature, the law of reality, physical laws, it didn't change. It won't change. Physical laws won't change because it's not like a program and we change like updating the software. No, the law of nature would not change. But then given that there are more carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, global warming, and for various reasons, there will be vegetation loss, whether it's due to deforestation, that's an active act by a human intervention, or whether it's just that a wildfire and various other reasons that interact with carbon dioxide increase in the atmosphere. So even the transition has changed. It used to be with sufficient greens in the world that carbon dioxide, given a certain amount, the rate of carbon dioxide processing to decompose that into oxygen, the rate were faster. But now, since there are more carbon dioxide, not only are there more to process, there are less greens doing the processing because of global warming. So the transition will be slower, but then there are more to process. So not only are there more carbon dioxide, the transition function is different now. So that's it is like the update function from state to state is different. The rate of carbon dioxide decomposition or processing into oxygen, it's slower now. So slower processing, more carbon dioxide. So I have to look at the statistics and even the mathematics in order to know when exactly how much carbon dioxide in the atmosphere there has to be in order to reach the point of no return. But it's very simple math because now there's too much to process, and even the processing is slowed down because of the increase in amount of carbon dioxide. So given that there's a point of no return, even if we don't know when it is, what it is, it's always earlier the better that we have a real zero. So yeah, maybe we don't know the science yet, we don't know the fact yet whether a 2050 net zero would have already passed the point of no return. We don't know, but there is a point of no return, and the safer bet is to transition to a real zero as early as possible, because once we are past that point, humanity will be doomed. So, so here's a summary. The equilibrium of system, though, so there could be when given the order of a system that it's in it, the parameters are within normal range and the inputs are normal, it will reach its goal state as time goes on. That's its equilibrium. But then once it's off track, its equilibrium will no longer be its original goal state, but it's hopeful that sometimes it's still reversible. Maybe we restore the parameters, or we can sustain some continuous restorative input. We don't know how the restorative input has to go on, but as maybe some system, even if it's off track, it's still reversible. So given that there's a difference between system failure and state failure, I distinguish a change in the system that's only a change in the state, that's a state failure, and a system failure, that's a change in the transition function, such that that failure in the transition function, the updating, it will be after which there's no way we can restore the system. That's when the system is totally beyond repair. And of course, when we talk about using an iPhone, there are parts that are that has failed and we can change parts of it, but the world isn't like that. We can't change the earth parts by parts. It's I think intuitively, informally, we can say it's an organic whole. So whole, it's an organic, holistic system in which it isn't like a computer that's been used too much, or with software with too much bugs. We can't change for another world. So there's only one Earth, and if we are beyond the point of no return, we can't get another one. So I hope that I've made my case about there being a tipping point, and if we are past the point of no return, then there's no going back, and all that we've been doing would have been useless. And I hope that I'm not being too much an alarmist, but I think we do have to look at the science of there being a possibility that we whatever we're doing is too slow. Thank you very much.